Welcome to Old Path and our study through the New Testament. We are currently going through the book of Matthew. We have just completed the Sermon on the Mount, and now we get to chapter 8, and I have lots to say on that as we transition to this other part of the book, or a new part of the book, as far as what the content is, and we're going to look at the other Gospels on this. This is kind of an interesting section because the other Gospels, the other synoptic Gospels mention these things mostly. So anyway, that'll all make sense here shortly. Let me do a couple of things here real quick as we continue on in the apologetic things detail-wise, looking through modern Israel. Is modern Israel, as we think about it, is that the regathering that God had promised of bringing the people back into the land? Is that what we're witnessing in the world around us today? Much of the church says no. And some of them, because they just don't think that this is actually those that are represented. Others who don't even believe that that will ever really happen, that all of the promises made to Israel are actually found in the church. And so we're going through and addressing that incrementally, bit by bit, kind of point by point as we go through it. And today I want to look at where that whole thought comes from as far as the church is concerned, that really kind of negates the existence of modern Israel. And so that there would be any kind of an end times work that God would do of regathering the people. So we're going to take a look at that as we get back or at the end of the study, rather, as we get into the apologetic topics that we've been going through. Also want to make mention, since we're talking about Israel, I've been sending out information to those who are interested in going in the springtime, but there's a little bit of an urgency to it because registrations are going to need to be in by the 9th of January. So kind of a minimal registration amount, but they need to know so that they can make accommodations. And so if you're interested in that and haven't contacted me yet, do so through the ministry's website, which is oldpaththeology.net. And I'd like to be able to show you what's going on with it. I know it's kind of a short window, but we are probably not going to be going back in the fall. From my understanding, the fall is going to be a circus. There's so much pent-up desire to go there. Most people can't put together a trip real quick. And so they need a lot more time. So anyway, we're able to do this on a short window, and hopefully before all the crowds get there, we'd like to go in the springtime. So if you'd like more detail on that, please contact me. The day's going to come when we just won't be able to do this anymore. Whether I get old and the Lord leaves us here for a while, or if it has more to do with the fact that as the closer that the Lord's return gets, the idea of travel in this world may change considerably. So if it's something that you're kind of on the fence on and think eventually I'll get there, but you really do want to go, at least talk with me, because you might find reasons to try to make it the sooner rather than later. So with all that, we can get to that. Again, contact me through the ministry's website, oldpaththeology.net. If you're not a subscriber to the YouTube channel, then please do, and that helps with the exposure of what we do here in studying all the way through the text, the Old and the New Testament, and then of course all the apologetic things that we do, and the importance of kind of just looking at all variety of things when it comes to that topic. So, chapter 8 in the Gospel of Matthew. It is a transition again, since I've mentioned chapters 5 through 7 are what we call the Sermon on the Mount. And there was something that I had mentioned. If you haven't had a chance to go back, if you haven't had a chance to hear it, rather, last week's study as we went through it was to look at the reaction of the people. The closing verses of it tell us that the people's reaction was one of really kind of astonishment. It was kind of like mouth open, wind gets knocked out of you. And it was because he had such incredible authority with which he spoke. Now, if we don't look back at the internals of what he actually said, that might not have the same impact that it ought to. And that is very simply that he makes statements that really only God has the ability to make. And so speaking of certainty, that when we look through just the Beatitudes, and blessed are for they will. And so he's giving assurances of things that really a normal person wouldn't be able to give because they're not written down necessarily anywhere else. He's teaching them with real specifics, and he does it all throughout those 3 chapters. So the people are sitting there listening to these things. It's not rehearsed. It's not written off of a, writing it or reading it off of a tablet or something. He's just teaching the people. And again, if you're who he is, that's not a difficult thing to do. You don't have to rehearse it. You don't have to have it written down. These are just things you know that you would be able to say. They need to hear it, and he's able to tell them what they need to hear. But in the process, they're picking up on the fact of who can speak like this? Who has the ability to have this mastery of things and be able to speak with this kind of certainty? Now, that's what he's done, and they're astonished at that. What we get in Matthew's gospel, and the other gospels are a little different in this, the little bits and details that we'll dive into, and we'll explain a little bit about the differences that are there, and they're not contradictions, they're just color, basically, is a better way of putting it, that when you look at all of them together, you get a much clearer picture. Anyway, what he does here are miraculous healings. And the things that he does, again, just show that he's in no ways ordinary. There's nothing about him. The things that he says are not ordinary. The healings and the power that he has, the abilities that he has are not ordinary. And that's really the intention. This is for him to make known who he is and what it is exactly that he's going to be doing. Now, in some cases, he's looking to try to make it where there's not too much hoopla and fervor around him and all the rest, because it could kind of slow down what he wants to accomplish. And so you're going to kind of get that. And again, doing the things that he's doing, it's going to gain attention. There's no way around it. But at the same time, he's not there to make a spectacle of himself, but at the same time, again, he's wanting to make sure that people know who he is and what he's able to do. And it gives incredible credibility to his words. So it's just such a really interesting balance here. So that's what he's got going on. That's what's taking place at this point in time. And he's demonstrating his ability to do things that are not normal. No one should be able to do the things that he does. So it's, again, fascinating. Now, of all the things that we're going to read today, none of these are found in John's gospel. John doesn't have any of these details. For the most part, both Mark and Luke do. There's one when it comes to the centurion. Mark doesn't mention it, but Luke does. And let me point out one other thing as well. There is not a chronology of events in this. It's not like this happened and then this and then this. Like you can put it into sequence. So they all have it around the same time in his ministry, but they don't have it necessarily sequentially. In Mark's case, again, with the centurion, he doesn't even make mention of it. So what we don't have here is a chronological, this happened and then that happened and then that happened. Remember, these are written kind of like decades later. And it's not a problem with the recall. The details, the internals of what took place are still consistent. But the timeline isn't really all that necessary. The Holy Spirit has them remember and record the things of great importance. So just think about it. If, of all of you who are listening to me, if three of us got together and we're talking about events that maybe we had all seen, and we're talking about them decades later, we might recall exactly what was the circumstance and where were we at the time and what exactly happened. Like, let's just put it this way. If somebody came to me and I was one of the eyewitnesses to this, and they had said, you were there when Jesus was teaching on the Sermon on the Mount. So what happened after that? And I'd be able to say, well, after he did that, we came back to Capernaum, and no sooner do we hit town than there's just people everywhere. And I know he healed a leper at that time. I know that Peter's mother was healed. He healed all kinds of people, cast out demons. There was a centurion. His servant was ill, and Jesus healed him without ever even seeing him. So we'd be able to do that. It doesn't necessarily matter what the sequence is. The events and what took place and that he did these things is really the intent and why we have them recorded. Again, it's to show that he is anything but ordinary. And so when you read through these things, don't get tripped up necessarily on what some people would point to as contradictory, and I'll point out some of those things. But I think, again, going back to the analogy, that if you're talking to people after the fact, and consider that Luke is interviewing people, he wasn't an eyewitness to these things. So Luke went to the people who were there, and he got their account of it. In Matthew's case, he was there for it. In Mark's case, Most people would believe that he heard the information primarily from Peter. But anyway, however the case may be, the more important matter to this is that it's the Holy Spirit who moved upon the writers, as we read in 2 Timothy chapter 3:16 about all Scripture is God breathed. It is given by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, and it is profitable. It's useful to us for these things, and that is for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, instruction in righteousness. It's really put there so, and it's preserved, that we could know that what we believe is founded in good reason, and there are reasons why we should believe the things that we believe. So, with all that said, let's turn to chapter 8. And we'll have a word of prayer, and we'll take a look at these events as they go on. They're really, again, fascinating. And I do love the idea that we can run the comparison, which I want to do on this, and kind of looking at what the other Gospels have to say. Not every single bit. Sometimes we'll look at both what Matthew and Mark, or what rather Mark and Luke had to say. In one case, Mark's detail is identical and really, really stripped down in as far as the centurions, or not the centurion, but one of the other accounts. It's really minimal, so we won't bother with it. Anyhow, you're free to go and take a look at them for yourself. If you have a chronological Bible, it really helps. If you've never picked one of those up, they're pretty cool, and they kind of have put them sequentially for the most part. I mean, there's still probably debate whether or not they're accurate, because there's just not enough to go on. But on cases like this, when you know that it's the healing of a centurion or Peter's mother, we know that this happened in Capernaum. So not a problem. They're pretty much able to put those together. So anyhow, Matthew chapter 8, let's have a word of prayer and we will take a look at the text. Father, we thank you once again for what a privilege it is to sit at your feet and to have you instruct us and show us the things that are important for us to recognize. Why does it matter today? And so we pray that you would lead our study, and that the assistance, as promised, of the Holy Spirit to make these things known to us would be in place, and that we could come to your word not just as readers, not just as hearers, but doers of the things that we're supposed to do, and being convinced more and more as we study through your word of the validity of what's said here, why it's important that we believe these things and know them. We give you thanks, we give you all praise in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So in the first 4 verses, we get the cleansing of the leper. And there's an important part here that it's easier to read past it and not really necessarily catch what has been said and what he wanted to do. There's the idea of even one of the things we'll get to of calling disciples to himself. So here's what he has taking place, and we go to locations like this. Capernaum, we know exactly where it is, and it's right on the shore of Galilee. So the idea that they would be coming down off the mountain, we usually see the Mount of Beatitudes the same day that we see Capernaum in our trips to Israel. And so what you have is a hillside, and there are a variety of places where it potentially could have been. But some place in the hills above Capernaum, again, Capernaum's right on the Sea of Galilee, but there's hills all around it to pretty much to the west of it. And so it could have been in any one of those places. And they form like a natural theater. And so he's able to say these things to the multitudes. The multitudes are following him, and it's really starting to gain attention. So that's what we read in verse 1. Now, when he had come down from the Mount of Olives, great multitudes followed him. And behold, a leper came to him, worshipped him, and saying, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Now, there's a lot that is said here that's really quite amazing. Now, one of the things about this leprosy was one of the things, according to the law, they were to be completely separated from the people. So there are multitudes mentioned here, but a leper is pointed out. So it's really caused questions about was this leper actually someone who was among the multitudes, which is kind of an odd thing that they would allow this, or was it something that, yes, there were multitudes, but he's able to do these things and say these things. It kind of gives the impression that this was a bit more private than just being thronged by thousands of people. But nonetheless, we get that this detail of this leper comes to him, but it says that he worshiped him as well. Now, it doesn't say exactly how. What did he say? What did he do? Did he, kneel? Did he bow? What did he do? However it was a recognition that worship, for a Jewish person, worship belongs to God alone. So if this man comes to Jesus and worships him, then it's already understood by the leper that he's no ordinary man. And he knows that he is able to heal on demand. And so there's a lot that's going on here. It's all implied, but it clearly is this way. So how he knows these things, what's taken place, how has he come into this knowledge, and how was this little opportunity, how did it come up? We're not given those details. And it's not important that we have them. But in the sequence of events, he comes down, there are multitudes of people. Somehow he has a discussion with this leper, and it does give the impression again that it's not done in front of the multitudes because he tells this man not to let anybody know about it. So as we read on, it says this, "And behold, a leper came to him, worshipped him, and said, 'Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean.' And then Jesus put out his hand and touched him," which nobody would do because he's leprous. You wouldn't do this. Jesus said, "I am willing, be cleansed." Immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And this is not something that would be common, of course. A lot of things that are kind of completely out of normal order. A leper wouldn't have proximity, people wouldn't want to touch them, and the idea that their leprosy would be instantaneously cleansed, none of that is normal. And again, this is supposed to make it where it's anything but normal. And the gospel writers are going to make sure that people understand after the fact that this Jesus stands above any other human that ever has been in the things that he did. Here, the look at this into chapter 9 is of the miraculous. So it tells us, so Jesus said to him, "See that you tell no one, but go your way, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift that Moses commanded as a testimony to them." Now, the thing that he's supposed to do, and you can go and read it, there's no reason for us to do it, but do it for yourself. Leviticus chapter 14 is what happens when a person has leprosy. And this is an outbreak of things on the skin. And some people would say it's maybe not quite the leprosy that we think of now, where you start to lose body parts and digits and all the rest of that stuff. It could just simply be something that's broken out on the skin, but it's contagious. And so they were separated. Now, the priests were not able to heal. That was not it. The healing was always going to come by the hand of God. But if a person had leprosy and they were separated from the people, that kept them from being part of everything. And so the only way to be brought back into the normal fellowship of the children of Israel is to be cleansed of that leprosy. And in order to be declared cleansed, there's quite the operation that takes place. Again, lots of moving parts, but it's in Leviticus 14. So long and the short of it, he says, present yourself to the priests. Now, there's no reason to think that this is talking about a priest anywhere else, but make the trek to Jerusalem. And there's a lot of speculation as to why he would have him to do that. One, that it would be something where the priests would have to take recognition of this. But again, if it was something that Jesus accompanied him, they're going to make this about Jesus. Rather, he can give that testimony at some time. It's going to be a testimony to them, and that's either that God is healed or if he mentions him by name, however it may be. But that he would have to go, and that would kind of take away a visible reminder that Jesus has healed this leprous man. There's a lot of speculation as to why that takes place. But what we can know and what we can definitely go by is this. This man comes to Jesus recognizing who he is and says, "Will you, if you are willing, then cleanse my leprosy?" And Jesus says, "I am willing." Touched him, he's healed instantaneously. Notice Jesus doesn't tell him to do what would be a violation to the law. And that is that you don't go through the proper inspection by the priest. You don't do all the things according to Leviticus 14, which they were all required to do. And it's important because Jesus says that about himself, that I haven't come to destroy the law. And I want to be the fulfillment of it. Or he didn't say he wanted to be. I am the fulfillment of it. So he's here to fulfill the law, to every bit of requirement that it would take. So he says to this man who is under the law, go do what the law tells you to do, and let it be a testimony to the priests who will see this. Now, the other Gospels have this recorded as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at the book of Mark. Mark has it in the first chapter, and that's not because he's looking at it in a different sequence of events. That's simply because Mark picks up on it at a much, Mark's gospel jumps into the whole narrative that Matthew does later on in Jesus's ministry. So when you compare them, you see that's pretty obvious. So he has it here in chapter 1, And we're going to start at verse 40. So let's get to that. In this case, it says in verse 40, now a leper came to him, imploring him, kneeling down to him. And so here, Mark tells us that it's kneeling. And I should have been more careful how I said it in Matthew. Matthew doesn't give us the detail about how his worship was. Mark does. So, a leper came to him, imploring and kneeling down to him, saying to him, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus, moved with compassion, that little extra bit there that Mark gives us, he's moved with this. He sees this as a person in desperate need. Well, it says, and you're going to notice that Mark points that out in other places as well, that pointing to him, and just the very human aspect of it. He stretched out his hand, he touched him, and he said, I am willing, be cleansed. And as soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy left him, and he was cleansed. And he strictly warned him and sent him away at once, and said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go your way, show yourself to the priest, and to offer for your cleansing the things which Moses commanded as a testimony to them. All of that sounds the same, with the addition of the kneeling that he did, the bowing to him. But notice this, however, he went out and began to proclaim freely. He told everyone, basically, and spread the matter so that Jesus could no longer openly enter the city, but he was outside in the deserted places, and they came to him from every direction. So that kind of helps us in our understanding what we're going to see later on at verse 18 of Matthew's gospel, that people they were all over him by this time. Well, Luke also picks up on this in chapter 4, and it's at verse 38 that we get that. I'm sorry, not 38. It's Luke 5, chapter 12. Luke chapter 5, verse 12. So it says this, and it happened when he was in a certain city. So notice, it's not even after the Beatitudes, though the Beatitudes in Luke, many of them are, the Beatitudes are here, but some of the things of the Sermon on the Mount are found in the earlier chapters. So Luke is kind of tracking with it in the same chronology. He just doesn't mention it as Capernaum. It's just a city. So, and it happened when he was in a certain city that, behold, a man who was full of leprosy saw Jesus. So this talks more about the desperate condition that he was in. And he fell on his face and implored him. So he gives added information, not just kneel, but face down. And he said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. That's consistent. So he put out his hand and he touched him, said, I am willing, be cleansed. Immediately the leprosy left him. All of that agrees with the other Gospels. So he charged him and to tell no one, but go and show yourself to the priests and make an offering for your cleansing as a testimony to them, just as Moses commanded. However, the report went out around concerning him. All the more, and great multitudes came together to hear him, and he healed by him. They were healed by him of their infirmities, which is consistent with what we're going to see in Matthew and Mark as well. So it's when you put all of these pieces together, and if you were so inclined to do it, it's a pretty interesting thing to be able to do. And that is if you did a side-by-side and just if you were to highlight it, and take all the little bits and pieces that are very specific to those particular Gospels, the things that are not common. You could take all the pieces together and you could read that and go, this is the full story on the event. John doesn't give us that detail. We get it from the three gospel writers. There's no inconsistency in it. It's just the adding of information. So, whenever people say, well, it's a contradiction because, one would say it was Capernaum and Luke said it's just another city. Or, the idea about don't tell anyone. Well, the other ones say that he did tell someone. That's just detail that Matthew doesn't give that the other two do. So even the type of worship and how he, the positions and all that stuff, all of that is just added in. It's not contradictory. It's all complementary, adding information. So really, really good that we understand that. Now back to Matthew. And the second one of these is the healing of the centurion. And this is fascinating when we look at Luke's version of it as well, because once again, people would point out a contradiction, and I'll show you where that is. Let's read the part of this from what Matthew has to say. Now, in verse 5, it tells us, now when Jesus had entered Capernaum, and this is how they know where this took place, it's Matthew who shows that the healing of the leper happened. It gives the impression before they hit Capernaum, which is why you could say, as far as Luke was concerned, it was in another city. Doesn't mention Capernaum, and it gives the impression that it happened before they got there. So again, all these things, when you put them together, you start to see that, okay, well, it's not giving a chronology. We just have bits and pieces and detail, but when you put them together, you get the whole picture. So when Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him pleading with him. Now that's going to be, that verse right there is where you're going to hear people say there's a contradiction, and you'll see. Lord, he said this, Lord, my servant is lying at home, paralyzed, dreadfully tormented. And Jesus said to him, I will come and heal him. Now, it's, again, when you read this next to Luke, just keep in mind these bits and pieces, these details, because you're going to need to put the two of them together in order to see that much more detail is given to us as far as Luke is concerned, but it's not contradictory. It is, again, complementary. Now, we get in verse 8, so the centurion answered and said, Lord, I am not worthy that you should come under my roof, but only speak a word and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man under authority, having soldiers under me, and I say to this one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. And then Jesus heard it, he marveled, and he said to those who followed, assuredly, I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. Now we're going to stop there for just a moment, and I want to go to Luke's version of this, because there are a lot of very, very real similarities. A paralytic, a person that's paralyzed, needs healing. We're going to find out from Luke, it's much more serious than even that. And the centurion knows who Jesus is and sends for him. Now we're going to find, it looks here like it's the centurion talking to him directly. Luke gives us a bit more detail, but it makes sense considering who he is. The other things about you don't have to come here, you're a man with authority. I understand what authority looks like. You can do this basically, the centurion recognizing two things. Who am I that you would come to my home? You don't even need to be here. I know that you can do this just by sheer will. That is completely consistent. So where we get this is in Luke chapter 7. Let's go there. And this is, again, where I think it's so good to take the two pieces together and put them together. And it is one of the things, if you remember, if you've been following along with since we started this, I purposefully do not teach the synoptics back to back to back. So it's not Matthew, Mark, Luke. I will jump from here. When we're done with Matthew, I'm going to jump to the book of Acts. So we're going to have all 28 chapters of Acts before we even come back to Mark. So we won't be going over the exact same detail very closely by. It'll take us a long time, so it'll kind of work through our minds. And so it's the same thing. Before I go to Luke, after being at Mark, we're going to go at that point to the book of Romans and then back to Luke and then 1 Corinthians, John, 2 Corinthians, and then we'll start to move our way through the New Testament, should the Lord have us here. So always with that caveat. Now, in Luke's Gospel, chapter 7, we pick this up at verse 1, and it tells us this. Now, when he concluded all of his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum, consistent with what we see in Matthew, and it is after he has said and done all the things that he has done. It says in verse 2, and a certain centurion's servant. Now, it's not the centurion, but it's the person who's there under his order. Now, some would say, well, wait a minute, was it the centurion or was it the person that the centurion sent? The person that's being sent is there instead of the centurion, but having all the same authority, he's there in that capacity. So it's not that it's contradictory, it's just that Matthew excludes the idea that it was his servants who came and did this, but they were there under the authority and speaking for the centurion. That's really all that's going on here. And again, this would be easy for them to have compared up. So it's the whole thing is just kind of silly and absurd that people want to point out a contradiction here. It's just, once again, the authority. Who are you there on the authority of? You're speaking for the centurion, because all the rest of it is consistent. So we read on, and it says, and a certain centurion's servant who was dear to him was sick and ready to die. So beyond just what we get in Matthew, he's at the point of being ready to die. So when he heard about Jesus, he sent elders of the Jews to him, pleading with him to come and to heal his servant. So now there's another bit of information here, and that is that he first pleaded with the Jewish people, the Jewish leaders that were there at Capernaum, and it's his servants who are there doing this. They're his liaison, if you will, going to the Jewish people first and then getting to Jesus from that point. Now, it tells us in verse 3, so when he heard about Jesus, he sent elders of the Jews to him, pleading with him to come and heal his servant. So they would be the people who would come to Jesus after the servants came. So, and when they came to Jesus, they begged him earnestly, saying that the one for whom he should do this was deserving, for he loves our nation and he has built us synagogues. So this is a way of us just saying, look, he's endeared himself to us. We are advocating for him because he loves our country. And again, he realizes that Jesus is his only hope at this point. Here's a Gentile, over 100 men, and yet he's very sympathetic to the Jewish people, built them synagogues, and he knows who this Jesus is, and he wants to seek his help in something that can't be remedied any other way. It's amazing. So it tells us in verse 6 rather, so Jesus went with them, and when he was already not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to him, saying, Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof. This is where it becomes completely consistent with Matthew. The other part of what we just read is the not the inconsistency, what some say contradiction. Rather, it's just all the detail that is given as a background of how did Jesus come to know about this. Now here, as he's on his way there, the centurion hears and he says he doesn't need to come here. Therefore, I did not even think myself worthy to come to you personally, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man placed under authority, having soldiers under me, and I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. Now, that's all very consistent once again. So when Jesus heard these things, he marveled at him and turned around and said to the crowd that followed him, I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. So here Luke says Jesus makes this an address to all the people who were around, that were following around with him. And those who were sent, returning to the house, found the servant well who had been sick. So as it takes whatever the time from when Jesus said it to the time that they get back to the house, that man is healed remotely. Jesus never even has to lay eyes on him, doesn't lay hand on him, doesn't do anything. Now, here's an important part. We should recognize at this point, there are those people, entire ministries are built on this, these healing prophets and these healing people and all the rest of it, these people who claim some kind of healing, and there's always some kind of a formula to it. And again, especially when it comes to the quote faith healers and all the rest of it, it's all this, it's got to be unconfessed. You got to make sure that you have your confessed sin. There can't be any sin left in your life. You have to completely believe. You have to do this. You have to do that. All kinds of caveats. And the only way that this is going to work for you to be healed is that you have to have enough faith, and you this and you that. It puts all of the emphasis on the person. In these cases, you're going to find that Jesus does this a number of different ways. The person who is paralytic, and ready to die isn't praying, isn't believing by faith or anything. He doesn't look at Jesus. He doesn't ask like the leper to be cleansed. This man is made well remotely, and Jesus never has to lay eyes on him. So there's no formula to this. There's no way that this stuff works where you have to follow some formula. So for those people that try to play that game, that somehow the only way that anybody's ever healed is through, these healing ministries, and it's got to be this idea you can't have unconfessed sin and all this nonsense, all this garbage. Once again, there are other times when people that were dead are raised from the dead. How much faith do dead people have? Just think your way through this stuff. It's important because people are making millions off of lying to people, and they'll give their account. It's just frustrating to watch people get wrapped up into all of that nonsense here. They get milked out of their money, and worse yet is that when it doesn't work for them, they think somehow they're the failure. I'm sick of seeing it destroy people, but it happens. So let's go back to what we read in Luke, because now Matthew. Matthew has some detail that isn't found in Luke. So remember, on the front end of the information, Luke gives us details that Matthew does not. Here, Matthew records something that Jesus said after what he had said about, I haven't seen this kind of faith, not even among you people. So all the Jewish people that are there, that know the history, they know who God is, they know all of that stuff, they know the miraculous history of their people, they're not even as invested in belief as this centurion from another country. So read again in verse 10 what Matthew says. So Jesus, when he heard it, marveled, and he said to those who followed, most assuredly I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. Now look at these next verses are not found in Luke. So it says, and I say to you that many will come from the east, from the west, and they will sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. So future to this time, there will be people sitting assembled with, if you're saying this to a Jewish audience, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, you're throwing around the pivotal names. There isn't an Israel if not for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob are the sons. It's the sons of Jacob, rather, that are the tribes of Israel. Jesus being of Judah, and they're in the area of Galilee. I mean, they're in a completely different tribal allotment by this point. So they know who this is. This is a very, very intriguing way that Jesus says that if you want to try to make the case, the kingdom of God, what will it have and who will be there? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and people who come from far outside the country will come and sit with him. And it says, but the sons of the kingdom will be cast out into outer darkness, and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. In the outer darkness, Gehenna, also, it's one of the places that they called Gehenna. It's in the Hinnom Valley, and it's to the southwest of the city. And it's the place where they would burn their garbage. It was where, at one point, Manasseh and other times they sacrificed their children out there. His point is, the people who should know best, those people, the Jewish people, the sons of the kingdom, are going to be separate. There's going to be a place of their gnashing of teeth, and people from countries that are not part of Israel are going to come and sit next to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it says, and then Jesus said to the centurion, go your way, and as you have believed, so let it be done for you. And his servant was healed at that same hour. So again, put all the pieces together and you don't find contradiction, you simply find detail. When Luke tells you, it's like the centurion goes to the Jews first. They go to him and say, go to see the centurion, please. He's sympathetic to us. Will you please meet his need? Interesting that they're in the whole process of it. These are the people in the synagogue. So these are people in his hometown in the synagogue there who are saying, which means that there's got to be some kind of a decent relationship he has with them. And it's as he's on his way that the servants are going to say to him, here's what the centurion says. So it's when you put all the pieces together that it fits really nicely together. Now, Matthew chapter 8, verse 14. Now, when Jesus came into Peter's house, he saw his wife's mother laying sick with a fever, and so he touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she arose and served them. Now, there's not a lot of detail that's given to us here. It gives the impression that he doesn't know anything about this. He just shows up. It's like Peter invites him over to the house. They go there, come to find out that Peter's mother-in-law is sick, and Jesus heals her period, end of story. It's just 2 verses, no big deal. Well, it's when we read the other accounts about this, actually Luke, back to Luke, in chapter 4. And you know what? Let's do this real quick. Before we get to chapter 4, let me turn there first and go to the very first verses of the Gospel of Luke. Let's go to chapter 1. And there is detail that Luke is very, very good at in his Gospel of wanting to make sure that he gives detail, and he's good at this and giving, and oftentimes giving detail that the other Gospels don't give. Well, look at what he says in chapter 1, verse 1. Inasmuch as many have taken in hand to set in order a narrative of the things which have been fulfilled among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word delivered from them to us, it seems good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write to you an orderly account, most excellent Theophilus, that you may know with certainty of the things in which you were instructed. So his point is, I want to give as much detail as I can. So he went to the eyewitnesses. I want to make sure you have an orderly account. I want to make sure that you have everything that you need to know. Really kind of interesting how he lays that out. And I just think it says so much about his gospel. Now, in chapter 4, we read at verse 38. Now, it says, Jesus, he arose from the synagogue and he entered Simon's house. So this tells us where they were before that. He's in the synagogue at the time. Now, if you go to Capernaum, and it is, again, one of the places that we visit, it's amazing to me when I think about this. They believe that they have a... without going into it time-wise, just I don't want to get so bogged down in this. They believe that they have located where Peter would have been. And no matter what it is, wherever he was in the city, we're talking about really close by. And if it turns out that they have actually located where Peter's house would have been from the excavations, we know where the synagogue was, that's for sure. And so if that's the case, from the synagogue to Peter's house would have been maybe 50 to 70 yards. That's about it. It's that close by. It's tiny as far as that's concerned. Now, Capernaum's bigger than what is actually in the walls of the excavation of Capernaum. You can see walls, you can see dwellings, you can see fences and all that stuff well outside of what's already preserved when you go to visit. From aerial view, you can see that the town was bigger than that, which would have been, you would expect that. It was a fishing town. That's where, people would have, there'd have been, a lot of commercial things taking place, and it's on the shores of Galilee, so you would be traveling along those roads. But anyway, interesting enough, when you look at this, and the proximity of everything is really, really tiny. So Luke gives us this detail. They were in the synagogue when this all took place. They entered Simon's house, but Simon's wife's mother was sick with a high fever, and they made a request of him concerning her. So this is why they're going there. So again, we get that detail because of Luke. And it says, so he stood over her, rebuked the fever, and it left her, and immediately she arose and she served them. Now, verse 40, it says, when the sun was setting. So we get basically the same kind of detail from both Matthew and from Luke, but Luke gives us this little bit of additional detail. They were in the synagogue. It sounds like it's made known to him before they go there, but in either case, he was informed before he lays eyes on her. And he heals her, and then she shows hospitality to them. Now, we all know that if you're really, really sick, you may come out of it, but the recovery time is not instantaneous. But with her, well enough where she's able to say, let me show hospitality to you. She has guests in her home, and she serves her guests, which is just common. So it's just, again, the additional detail that you get from the other Gospels, just really, really cool. Now, back to Matthew 8. And we get in verse 16, which is consistent with the rest of them. When evening had come, they brought to him many who were demon-possessed, and he cast out spirits with a word, and he healed all who were sick. That's important. that the other Gospels are consistent with this, that they brought these people to him. Matthew gives us one little bit of information here that the others don't. But his point is that this is now, he's not trying to recoil from the things taking place. He doesn't shoo them away. He actually says, I'll do this as these things are happening. And so as they start coming to him, these things start to really move, and they kind of snowball. The leper, more than likely cleansed on the way to Capernaum. Everything seems to be consistent with that. When he hits Capernaum, then the centurion thing happens, maybe sequentially, maybe not sequentially. Peter's mother, it's just different depending on which gospel you're looking at. And then now it's just the very general. There were people who were demon-possessed. He cast them out with a word, just instantaneous. Healed their sicknesses. Doesn't give us a lot of detail on the whole thing. It was done. Now, here's what Matthew tells us that's different than the other Gospels. And this all happened that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, He himself took our infirmities and he bore our sicknesses. Now, most people look at that verse, and that's taken from chapter 53 of Isaiah, which is really the whole it's the whole suffering servant, it's the crucifixion, it's the prophecy along with Psalm 22, the most vivid that we have of any of the Old Testament prophecies about Jesus being put to death and the reason why. But it says here, it makes this application really, really cool, that this is what was intended by Isaiah 53, where it says is verse 4, this is what's quoted. But notice this, He himself took our infirmities and he bore our sicknesses. Now, bore meant that he took them upon himself and carried them away. That's the Greek on this, is not just that he put them on, it's like threw them on his shoulders, but no, he removed them. So these things were taken from people by bearing their sins or bearing their needs of healing. That means that he took these things away from them. And so he didn't become a leper. He didn't become, sick. He didn't do any of those things. It means he took from the people their illness and removed it, took it away. He bore it, picked it up, carried it away. So when you read what you see in Isaiah, it is here that Matthew records for us what exactly was meant by Isaiah 53:4, that he was the one who took upon himself our infirmities, bore our illness. That means took it upon himself and carried it away. So again, he wasn't inflicted with the same things. He healed those things. He took away from the people the things that ailed them and removed them. So here we see that Matthew, again, very, very consistent with what he says. Now, this is verse 18, and we'll probably make this the last of the parts that we'll do in this today. And it says this, verse 18 through verse 22. And when Jesus saw the great multitudes about him, he gave a command to depart to the other side. That's the important part, is that he's going to, and he says this apparently verbally, he doesn't say it to anybody else, or it doesn't tell us exactly who all heard this. He just saw that it was making it difficult with the throngs of people, and he's got other things he wants to do. Now, we do know that he was very careful to want to minister to his disciples. And again, if things are coming down this fast, it seems like everything happened just kind of in series. So he has the whole Sermon on the Mount. They come back on their way back home. He heals a leper. A centurion's servant is healed. Peter's mother is healed. They've had time in the synagogue. He's had the discussions with the Jews. All of those things have taken place. This is all happening. I'm sure there's a lot for him to unpack with the disciples. Probably a lot of questions about the Sermon on the Mount, the healings, and he wants time with the disciples. So here's where he says, let's go ahead and depart to a different place, and it's overheard. Now there are two people that reply to this. So a certain scribe came and said to him, Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus said to him, Foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Then another of his disciples said to him, Lord, let me go and first bury my father. But Jesus said to him, Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead. Now, before we go back and look at any of this detail, let's take a look at Luke. Because once again, Luke has some detail that's not found here. The first two are very consistent, but Luke adds one third person that's mentioned here, and he records this. Now, Does that mean that Matthew failed? Certainly not. Matthew recorded what he was led by the Holy Spirit to do. Luke picks up and gives a little bit more detail on this. So in chapter 9, Luke chapter 9, verse 57, we get this. So it happened as they journeyed on the road. This would have been when he could have said what he was saying. The multitudes are there and they're walking, and it's like, we've got to get away from this place because of the multitudes. Now, not for fear or anything else, but it's like there are things that are needing to be done. And in my estimation is I want some time with the disciples. There's lots to go over with them. So as it happened as they journeyed on the road that someone said to him, Lord, I will follow you wherever you go. And here it just says someone, not a scribe that we get from Matthew, but it's someone says this to him. Jesus said, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Consistent. His answer is identical in both places. What we get from Matthew, it was one of the scribes, the people who were known for writing down everything that's there in the text. And here it's just a person. Now the second, then he said to another, follow me. But he said, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. Now keep your finger there and let's go back. And notice what he says about that in verse 21 of Matthew 8. Keep your finger on Luke. And he said to another of his disciples said, Lord, let me go first bury my father. And Jesus said to him, let the dead bury their own dead. Now go back and look at verse 59 in Luke. Then he said to another, follow me. But he said, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. So same excuse. But here Jesus is saying, follow me. He's given that detail about saying to him, follow me. What we have right here is the combining of the two things. In Matthew verse 22, it's follow me and let the dead bury the dead. When you compare it to what we see in Luke, Jesus said to him, let the dead bury their own dead, but he says the follow me as a part of verse 59. It's a subtle difference, but it is nonetheless. He calls him first, and I like how Luke has done this. This man is already declared as a disciple, but he says, follow me, knowing that there's going to be a response here. And so the man says, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. And this is, again, priorities. I'll get around to following you, Lord, but I've got things that I need to do. And this is really ultimately what's the reason for these passages. It is intended to show to us that there are things about following him that means it's a denial of just the day-to-day life that we previously had. And it is one of those things. What is your priority? Well, I can't follow you until. And he's getting people giving him excuses. So it is, I have things that need to be resolved before I can follow you. And this is Jesus's reply to them in these cases. So again, the first one, I'll follow you wherever you go. Will you really? And so all the creature comforts won't be there. Foxes have their own holes. Birds of the air, they have nests. But me, from day to day, you could be anywhere. You have nowhere to rest your head. You might be sleeping out in the pasture with a rock as your pillow. So that whole thing, are you really willing to do that, even if it means that there's no creature comforts to the whole thing? So to somebody like a scribe, that's going to be something that's like, well, I'm not used to that. These are important people as far as society is concerned. Here, you're going to live the life of just a person that goes from place to place. So, that's a cost. And then again here, well, I've got family, I've got a father. Who am I, who's going to take care of these things if I follow you? What happens if something happens to them and there's no one to take care of them? So Jesus' reply to him is, let the dead bury their own dead. Interesting that he talks about that he refers to them as being dead, and a lot of speculation as to what that is. But if they're not willing to follow, if your family is not willing to follow, are you going to stay and be with them as though they're dead the same way? Or you're going to use them as an excuse not to do the hard things? Once again, it's the cost that's here. Now, you'll notice that in Matthew, it ends with those two examples. So it's let the dead bury their own dead. It ends at verse 22. Look at what Luke does in verse 61. And another also said, Lord, I will follow you. Now remember, he has said, let's go to another place. That's what we get in Matthew. A scribe says, I'll follow you wherever you go. Will you really follow me and have no creature comforts? There's a cost. To the other person, Well, I have family. Well, your family's not willing to follow me. So do you want to just follow me now, or do you want to let the dead bury the dead? You should let the dead bury the dead. Why are you making this your issue? There's a cost. Now, let me make sure I'm very careful with this. God does not tell us to cast off our families. That's not what I'm getting at. But the point is, if you have to make the decision between one or the other, I'm either going to have peace with my family and deny the Lord, or have Him be my priority, even if that means that the family has to fend for themselves and take care of their own needs. Don't use the family as an excuse. I don't want to offend them. I don't want to make them angry. I can't follow the Lord because it might put me in a bad situation, whatever the case may be. Count the cost. The third, another also said to him, Lord, I will follow you, but let me first go and bid them farewell who are in my house. Same basic kind of a thing. It's like, I have other affairs. And so Jesus says, no one having put his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom. So this point is, you're not some novice who's just now stepped into this whole thing. You're a person who is now starting to use your former life as an excuse not to travel further. So again, there's an accountability to this. If you're going to give reasons why, that I'd like to follow you, but there's always the caveat. His point is, there are no caveats. You're either going to or you are not going to, but there's no place for you to, if you will, hide. You need to do what is put before you, and Jesus makes sure that they understand that there's a cost to following Him. Really, really important. Now, boy, of the things that we've looked at, really, really good for us to say He did these healings. There's very amazing things that were done in this, how He did it. There's no programmed way of healing, contrary to what we hear from many of the people in the Word Faith movement. Those are all really important things for us to recognize. What we just read here is hugely, massively important to the believer, because the world will always try to give us things to busy ourselves doing. And I'm guilty of it. I mean, the world throws lots of things for us to get tied up in. But never for a moment should the world ever present something to you where you have to make a decision. Am I going to walk with the Lord, or am I going to do this? As though there's some kind of an alternative. I think we want to be always at the same place where Peter was in John chapter 6. Even if we don't understand and have all the details. When Jesus looked at the disciples and said, are you guys going to leave as well? Because they couldn't get their minds around what He was saying. And I'm sure He had plenty to say to them after it was done. But nonetheless, He looked to the disciples, and it was Peter who said, well, where else are we going to go? You alone have the words of eternal life. So if the believer can be at that place, I don't care what the world throws at you. I don't care what the world offers you. If it really offers something that is an alternative to the Lord, would we not want to be in the same place where Peter was? I know what the world's offering me, but where else am I going to go? What does it actually have of any importance to me? You have the words of eternal life. I have nowhere else to go. That's where the believer wants to at all times be. So we will pick up in one of my favorites, and there's two pieces together in this, starting at verse 23, when Jesus stills the water as they're going across the Galilee, and what they encounter on the opposite side of the Galilee when they get there. So that'll be next week. We'll go through that, and we'll look at, again, the important part of this is the comparison of the Gospels, because there's lots of really interesting information that's there. So we pick up there next Thursday. In our apologetics and going through giving an answer for why we believe what we believe, we've been going through over the past weeks the point by point of making the case for what I believe is God gathering the people of Israel back into the land, because there are future things that the Bible talks about that clearly have never taken place. Now, I believe that He has brought them back into the land, and yes, for the most part, they are not looking to Him. But that doesn't negate the fact that they are His people. And I can look at the historical precedent for this. There were so many times when the people in Israel were absolutely rebellious against Him to the point of paganism, doing ungodly things, just vile, wicked, ungodly, demonic things. They never stopped being His people. So His promises to them were everlasting, though their time in the land would be sometimes limited by the things taking place. However, so many of the prophets, and we'll get to those passages, so many of the prophets have said that God's going to do this work in them at a later time, not saying when, but He would once again restore them to the land. Now, they were displaced from it. 70 AD was really kind of the big displacement, if you will, other places where things happened after that and uprisings that happened. But nonetheless, the real sacking of Jerusalem was really kind of the end of it, as far as them being a people, though they were still servants of Rome, and before them the Greeks, before them the Persians, before them the Babylonians. Nonetheless, they were displaced from the land. 1900 years. But there were passages, and we're going to get to them in the weeks that we still have to finish this out. God made promises that he would restore them. And to this point in history, it's never taken place. I believe that it's taking place in our world today. Even though they're in a place of unbelief, and though it's basically, they were brought back into the land, and a lot of things happened in the world with the assistance of like the UN and other, non-governmental groups, people of the Zionist movements at the time in the early parts of the last century. That's not without precedent either. God brought them back through the Persians under King Cyrus after their 70 years of being displaced from the land. God's the one who said, I'm going to send you away for 70 years, but you'll return. So all of that took place, but yet nonetheless, there is still the idea that they were brought back through secular sources, and God brought them back into the land, and yet they were still displaced again. And there are verses that tell us that God's going to restore them to the land. Never will they be displaced again. So those passages are plentiful, and if God is, as we know him to be, if he is precise in his language, there's no way that he's going to fail in making good on a promise. Now, so why is that something that's so hard for some to grasp? Why is that people can't wrap their minds around that? Well, let's look at one of the favorite verses that they used to make the case why there's really nothing future for the people of Israel, and they will look at some verses. Now, over these next couple of weeks, we're going to look at, actually, after starting next week, the next study. I'm doing these in succession, every single Bible study that we do. I just finished with Isaiah earlier this week, and we looked at the first part of it, or we looked at this, and here I am Thursday in the book of Matthew, and we're looking at the next step. The next thing that I'll be dealing with is when we're in Isaiah next week, and again in Matthew the next Thursday. So as I work through these, we're going to be having them and just kind of working through them in a synchronized way, just one piece after another, question, 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 answer, answer, answer. So in this case, we have the idea of replacement theology. And replacement theology, the long and the short of it, there are plenty of passages, but I'm going to pick one that really helps to encapsulate, because I've had it thrown to me a number of times, that this is kind of like one of those passages where, look, there it is, it's really easy to understand. So, all the promises. I'm going to do this work, I'm going to make these promises, because you're going to be, the nations are going to be blessed from you, Abraham, and so because there's a blessing that's implied, of course, it makes the church go, well, how does the church figure into that? Well, here's one of the passages that they point out. It is in the book of Galatians, and we're going to spend at least our next study, which will be next Monday. We'll look at this at the end of that, of looking through at least for 1 week, Galatians chapter 3. It might take us 2 weeks. We'll see. But here's what he says in verse 29. And if you are Christ's, if you belong to Jesus. Now, how do we belong to Jesus? We've trusted him for our salvation. His blood has cleansed us of our sin. We've been born again, regenerated by the Spirit of the living God. We are his. He's purchased us with his own blood. That's easy for us to understand. So if you are his, then you are Abraham's seed and you are heirs according to the promise. So that seems about as plain as it can be in the eyes of the people who believe that that's that. And so it's settled. We are the promise of Abraham's seed, and that seed being Jesus, because of him who came through the line of Abraham, because Abraham begat Isaac, Isaac begat Jacob, Jacob begat his sons, the 12 sons. One of those sons was Judah, and Judah is the line through which Jesus comes, and Jesus is the Savior of mankind. Therefore, game, set, match. Jesus is the fulfillment of everything that was spoken about to Abraham. And so there it is. It's settled. There isn't anything else more that we should have to concern ourselves with. It's really kind of a settled matter. And that's the reasoning that we get from this. Now, we are going to look at more of this when we look at it next week, but I just want to kind of give what is the common answer that we have about, is the church really what's supposed to be all the promises to Israel? Are they all actually fulfilled in the church because of the work of Jesus, and that God has nothing left to do as far as the Jews are concerned? That is the way that this is taught. So if that's the case, then we should be able to look at the internals of Galatians, especially chapter 3, and kind of come to an understanding of why would he say this in the closing verse. So we're going to do this next study together, which we'll do this coming Monday, and we'll look through some of the internals. But let me just go ahead and set it up, and I'll probably reiterate a little bit of this next week. If you look at what chapter 3 is about, and really the whole book of Galatians, the book of Galatians is written to a group of people who think that going back to the law, very similar to some of the same arguments you'll find in the book of Hebrews, that you're going to go back to something that cannot save you. And so his point is, he starts it by saying, Galatians, foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you that you would believe this lie? And he asks the question, were you made right before God because of something that you did? In my paraphrase, or is it because you believed and God has forgiven you because of your faith in Jesus Christ? So how is it, if you believe that somehow you can be saved because of the work of Jesus, do you think that you're somehow going to earn it by your own actions? And he uses Abraham by saying to him, or to these people here at Galatia, what can we learn from Abraham? It's not the promises that were given to Abraham, it's that he believed those promises. It isn't about that the church is the fulfillment of the promises made to Abraham. The whole upshot of chapter 3 is be like Abraham, because he couldn't understand how it could happen, but God made promises to him that defied explanation, but he believed them nonetheless. That's what the entire chapter is about. So you can get it from his opening arguments in chapter 3. Who's bewitched you to think? Were you made right because of works of the law, or because you had trust and faith in Jesus? So he says now at the end of the chapter, if you belong to Jesus, just know that you're an heir to the promise. Now there's a couple of promises that are talked about in this. The first one is chapter 12, verse 3 in Genesis. Through you the nations, plural, will be blessed. Well, the Galatians are the nations. They're not the Jews. They're not Israel. They are modern day the central part of Turkey. Were there Jews among the Galatians? Absolutely. Were there non-Jews, pagans, and Gentiles among them? Absolutely. So the churches in Galatia, churches plural, there are many of them, they're in a part of the world that is not Israel. So the promise that anybody who was not Jewish that was saved in any of the churches around Galatia are heirs to that promise of chapter 12, verse 3. The nations, plural, will be blessed because of one of your descendants. But it makes no mention of the descendants in chapter 12. The descendants aren't mentioned until the following chapter, chapter 13 in Genesis, and we've been covering this, going through this in succession. So when we have all of these put together, you're going to notice I'm going to be wearing something different each one, but you're going to notice that we're able to put these together in a sequential manner. It's important that we know how all of these pieces fit individually, one by one. So as far as this is concerned, once again, the arguments are usually that the church has replaced, and we have been given all of the promises because we believe like Abraham, or because we belong to the Lord in the person of Jesus Christ, and we're sons of Abraham. So that means, if that's the case, then everything that was ever spoken about in the way of promise to Israel has now been realized in the church through Jesus Christ. And this is one of the places that they point to. What we're going to do is take a look back at chapter 3 this coming Monday of Galatians, and start to put together the other pieces that argue completely against the idea of replacement theology. Chapter 3 is one of the replacement theology people's favorite passages, and we'll look at Romans as well in the weeks to follow. But we're going to take a look at the internals of chapter 3 and be able to settle this. that what we have here is not an argument for the replacement of Israel by the church, but rather that Israel is one entity, the church is another entirely, and all of those promises, especially because of what the Old Testament teaches, are still in force, and I believe they are being fulfilled in front of our eyes. They are being assembled back to him in their land that he promised to them as an everlasting promise, the land, and that they're being brought back, many in unbelief, for a future time when many will come to him in a time of very difficult history for the Jewish people. So interesting, just fascinating things that we look through in the text. Look forward to sharing the rest of this with you as we work through it. Not only Matthew, but also the book of Isaiah on Mondays, and then this series of looking through modern Israel and what does it all mean. So, any questions on any of what I've shared with you? If you want information on the Israel trip, whatever the case may be, you can contact me through the ministry's website, which is oldpaththeology.net, and love to hear from you and love to be able to answer any of your questions. So feel free to contact me through that, or put your comments in the YouTube channel. Actual studies there, we do leave the comments open, but we do monitor them in case something weird is said in there. I do monitor it, and I will remove stuff. I will even remove people if they're argumentative for no reason or posting odd things. So we pick up in Isaiah on Monday, and we'll keep working through the question of Israel and modern Israel and the promises that God made to them.